Hello everyone, Chris Peterson here, bringing you my third round game from the 2012 Monument Open. This time I'm going to be playing as White against Brian Wall. Going into this game, I had a +1 record against Brian. 5 wins, 1 draw, 4 losses. And I tell Brian all the time that he's never going to catch up to me, but he always tries really hard to refute my shenanigans. And just about every game that we have ends up in these crazy tactical positions. And it leaves the observers dumbfounded. And even after the games, Brian and I are also dumbfounded, especially at how poorly we were actually playing. So I played e4, a6, and Brian has a lot of success with this opening. He played it throughout 2012. I've covered it in other previous videos. d4, d5, knight c3, c6, and this is how. This is now some sort of strange Kh type position. So I played bishop e3. I didn't want to play knight f3 right away because he was going to play bishop g4 and just pin the knight. And I didn't want to play e5 because that would just lead right into king and pawn, or a Kh/French type position that Brian knows really well. So I played bishop e3, knight f6, and then I played f3, just trying to secure my center. D takes e4, d takes e4, and now knight g4, so he's threatening my bishop on e3. And sorry if I'm going through this video, or this game, a little bit quickly. There's still a lot of depth to this game, so it's still going to be a somewhat long video, but most of my viewers don't, or most of you guys, I guess, don't sit through the whole game, so I want to try to get through it quickly. Bishop takes bishop f4, e5, d takes e5, queen b6, queen f3. So I probably should play queen d2, and this leads to some really wacky positions. I can't play queen takes c3 because of queen f2 check. B takes c3, knight h6, queen d6. And something like this might happen where I have a lot of pressure down the d file, but I have a really fractured pawn structure where I have doubled c and e pawns. So I'm up a pawn, I have a lot of pressure, but really bad pawn structure. So instead I played queen f3, which puts pressure on f7. Maybe not quite as good, but I was okay with it. So Brian took my b2 pawn, and this is, I don't know, losing my queen, either my A or my B pawns, just my flank pawns in general, I'm usually not too concerned with, especially this early in the opening. I already have a lead in development. Brian's spent a lot of time moving his pieces around, his queen and his g4 knight. Meanwhile, I'm just developing. So I get rook b1 in for free against the queen. Well, just to look at some other moves that he could have tried. Instead of queen takes b2, the bishop c5 is really interesting because it hits my knight on g1, which is now undefended. Castles, bishop g1, bishop c4, something along these lines might happen. e6 is a really nice move because now this knight on g4 is undefended. Fe6, queen g4, rook f4, queen g7. And you can see that this position is going to get crazy pretty quickly. In this position, White has two pawns for the piece that he's down. He is completely developed, where Black is going to have to spend at least 4 more moves to get fully developed. 1 to get a space for the knight, 1 to move the knight, and 1 to connect the rooks. So I guess that's 3 moves. So it's tough to say. I mean, the computer says that White's winning, but this is a very tough position for humans to play, at the very least. So that's. Let me just go back really quick. So that was another potential line that could have happened. Brian and I went through a whole bunch of different variations that are all stamped in the PGN, and I'll put the PGN in the description. That'll include some of the commentary and a large chunk of the variations that could have occurred. So queen a3, taking the c2 pawn is pretty crazy, because after h3, knight h6, bishop e2 is nice because it's threatening bishop d1, which traps the queen. And there isn't a whole lot that black can do to get out of it. So taking the c2 pawn would have been a little bit bonkers, I think. So instead he plays queen a3, and then I played bishop c4. And you can see that white already has a massive lead in development. The pawns are equal, so it's not even necessarily a gambit. It's just kind of a pawn structure sacrifice. I have double D pawns and fractured queenside, but I have a massive lead in development. So I'm up at least 2 tempos from what I can see. No, 3. I have a rook on b1, a queen. These are my developed pieces here that he doesn't have developed yet. So he spent 18 minutes here and he played queen a5, which is an excellent defensive move. He could also try queen e7, but that's a little more passive, and after knight a4 it's still going to be a pretty tough position for black to play. But after queen a5, it gave me a lot of tactical possibilities, because I'm up 3 tempos in development. There's lines in the center that are wide open. Both the F and the D files are open. So I have a lot of tactical potential here. But the right move is just to play simply and play knight gd2 and then continue with the attack a little bit later. Just hold on to my developmental advantage for a little bit. But instead I jumped the gun a little bit and played bishop takes f7 check. Because I thought after e6 check that I was going to be having a really strong position, because now I'm threatening to take this knight. This knight is hanging, and it's just getting really bad. So he plays king g8. A slightly better defensive move might be king e8, but they're probably about comparable. I don't know why I have these here. Let me take those away. e6 check. There's some really good variations here. So if he plays king takes e6 check, I take the knight with check. If he plays bishop takes e6 check, then I'm going to play bishop takes f8 check, and I'm regaining the piece that way. So he plays king g8, and now I played bishop takes b8. Now, my original idea in this position was actually to play bishop to d6, and the idea is I'm threatening mate on f7 as well as f8, and I'm also threatening his knight on g4. So his only good move here is knight f6, and then after e7 I'm regaining the piece this way. And it might be slightly better this way because he no longer has the bishop pair, whereas in the line that was played in the game, bishop takes b8, he can maintain the bishop pair. But now I am threatening the knight on g4 and also mate on f7, and I also regained my piece with one foul swoop. So bishop takes b8 was a fairly good move, but it leaves black with a lot of defensive capabilities. So Brian plays knight h6, which is actually a pretty bad move. He should play h5. h5 both defends his knight, and it also gives left for the king. He could also try queen to h5, which defends the knight and defends f7. Maybe also good is just bishop takes e6, because it gets rid of that deadly e6 pawn, and it defends the knight on g4. But after knight h6, I can play bishop takes bishop to f4. Why do I keep saying that? And now I'm threatening to take this h6 knight. And now Brian plays bishop to b4. And this is actually another mistake. So Brian's making mistake after mistake after mistake, and I'm able to capitalize on a couple of them, but here I misread the situation and don't follow through with the correct attack here. Here I was scared because he has this lined up on my king. He's starting to get his rook's mobilized, potentially to one of these two squares. His king is starting to look fairly safe, and he's going to have counterattack potential. So I wanted to get my king out of the line of fire, so I castled. And this is actually a big mistake. I should actually play bishop takes h6. And the idea is after g takes h6, queen g3 check, now I'm castling with check. So on top of breaking open his king, driving it back towards the center, I'm castling with check, making my king safe. So this would be an excellent line to go into. Now rook takes b4 is really strong because after queen e5 I'm threatening the bishop e6 and the rook h8. But instead I played this horrible castles move, and now Brian plays rook f8. And now Brian's weathered the opening storm, and he knows it. He offered me a draw here, and I seriously considered accepting, but I decided that the position was a little bit too crazy, and decided a draw wasn't a very good result. So I played queen g3. Sorry, let's get the little animation going. Queen g3, and he's now I'm threatening to take the h6 knight. Now, throughout the rest of this game, you'll kind of see that, well, at least for the next few moves, that I make a series of threats. And these threats do more than one thing, granted, but for the most part it's all about the initiative. White wants to maintain this initiative for as long as he can. And every time I make a threat that he has to respond to, I am holding on to the initiative. And it'll only take like one or maybe two slight slip-ups or loss of tempi to have Brian wrestle the initiative back from me, because Brian is pretty much fully developed now. So Brian played knight f7, and this is from my analysis. I don't have it worked out yet. But here, I was kind of struggling what to play. I had all the right ideas in my mind, but I was already mentally exhausted from my previous games, and then all the tactics from the opening in this game. And the best moves, which are e5 and a3, have very powerful ideas behind them. e5, for example, is making way for the knight to come to e4. And once my knights get into the game and can corral around his king, black's going to be in a lot of trouble. Just looking at this f6 square for starters. So e5 would have been really nice. a3 has a really powerful idea of taking on b7, so bringing my rook in, that'll attack laterally. So there's all these great ideas coming into the position. But I ended up settling on bishop to c7, and the idea was that I wanted my knight to come to f4 to harass this e6 bishop. And also, by going to c7, I might be able to redirect the bishop later to d4, which you'll see. So I played bishop to c7. Brian played queen c5 check. Yeah, you see I want to go bishop b6 to d4. So queen c5 check, which is a good move, but it's also just driving my king to an even safer square on h1. h5. So h5 is a nice move because the only piece that he hasn't developed yet is his rook on h8, and if he can develop it through h6, then he's probably doing well. So I played knight f4. Yes, it's hanging the c3 knight, but I'm also hitting the e6 bishop, which would attack both the rook on f8 and threaten mate on g7. So, and it also hits the queen potentially. So, so I don't know if he can take that c3 knight or not. So he goes bishop to c4, and now he's attacking my rook on f8. And I spent a lot of time here. Well, not really here, but I spent a lot of time considering what I need to do leading up to this position. And here I was kind of frustrated because I wasn't finding the right ideas, and I wasn't sure what I needed to play. And finally, in just like a random stroke, that I was having. I came across the move that I played, and I played knight c to d5, and let me get rid of these really quick. So the main idea behind knight c to d5 is that I'm threatening the immediate knight to f6 mate, right? The king has no squares. It's like a smothered mate. So that's the immediate threat. But I'm also threatening knight to e6. Let me do a green arrow for aesthetics. So I'm threatening both knight f6 mate, knight e6, which hits the queen. Actually, let's make it color coordinated. So knight e6 threatens both the queen on c5, and it also threatens mate on g7. So there's a few caveats here. Now I have two pieces hanging. I have a knight on d5 hanging to multiple pieces, mainly this pawn on c6. And then my rook on f1 is also hanging to the bishop on c4. So if I can't make anything happen, I'm going to be losing material. So now Brian played the only defensive move. You can see from the computer analysis that he really only has one good defensive move. He played rook to h6. And now my bishop has a chance to swoop into d4. So bishop to b6, queen d6, there really isn't any other squares. And then bishop d4, and now again I'm threatening another mate on g7. So if we look at the last few moves that I've played, I made threat after threat after threat. First I threatened his knight on, I threatened the knight on h6. Then I threatened the queen on a5. Then after that I threatened, I had to get unchecked. And then I threatened both to fork the king and queen and the knight, and the mate. And then I threatened the queen again, and now I'm threatening another mate. So the last 5 or 6 moves have all been threat after threat after threat. And this is kind of my definition of the initiative, is where I'm making tactical threats that my opponent has to respond to for fear of losing. And because he has to respond to, he has to take time out of improving his position to answer those threats. So, granted, some of the defensive moves that he made improved his position, like rook h6, bringing in his last developed piece. But for the most part, that's kind of what the initiative is. So now, Brian, thinking the storm was over, played knight to e5, and he offered me a draw again. And I'm not really going to comment on what the USCF rules are as far as offering repetitive draws, because it has been like an hour or more and several moves since his last draw offer. Well, I guess it's only been what is it, like seven moves? It's only been 7 moves, and he's offered me 2 draws already. But it's more of a way for me to kind of admit exhaustion and just agree to the draw and kind of cop out of this crazy position we've ended up in. So again, I seriously considered accepting, because I was starting to get frustrated again because I couldn't make any of the tactics work. And I looked at all these ideas, everything I was calculating. I was looking at knight takes h5, rook takes b4. Well, let me just put them on. Knight takes h5, rook takes b4. What else? Queen g5, and like rook fd1. All these crazy tactical looking moves, and I just couldn't make any of them work in my head. And if I had a chance to like sit down and like touch the pieces and move them around on my own, I might have been able to find the correct move here. But I didn't. So the right idea, the working idea, is rook takes b4. But it's a really complicated move because there's so many different responses that black has. First of all, there's 3 highly tactical, very different variations that spawn from this. And that's what was making it really difficult to calculate this all the way. So maybe the best defense is, we'll look at bishop takes f1 first. But then I play rook takes b7, again threatening another checkmate. Rook f7, rook takes f7, king takes f7, and now queen g5 is nice because it hits the knight twice. C takes d5, bishop takes e5. The knight can't really move because I'm crashing in on g7, so that's why you couldn't take that. Queen f8, e takes d5, and now I have these two connected passed pawns for the exchange. So white is clearly much better. The other possible defensive idea is bishop takes d5, but this one is much worse than any of the others. So after bishop takes e5, queen takes e5, e takes d5, and suddenly white is up a piece. And the real testing line is the c takes d5. Oh no, I'm sorry. Is bishop takes... No wait, c takes d5. And then I play rook takes b7, threatening mate. Rook f7, rook f7. King takes f7. And I had gotten this far in my calculations, but I just did not see the possibility of bishop takes e5. My brain did not make the connection of the discovered check on g6, winning the queen, and this idea of bishop takes e5. So after bishop takes e5, if queen takes e5, if he tries anything else, I'm going to be crashing in on, crashing through either on g7 or with the multitude of discovered checks that I have with my rook. Queen takes e5, knight g6 check, bishop f1, knight takes e5, and I mean queen for a rook, white is clearly winning, but with the two pawns, it's even more so. So I missed that idea. I didn't play rook b4, even though it was in my mind and I wanted to play it. But instead I played this real pansy move. I played knight d3. I felt awful making this move. I was like, I made all these great initiative, tactical, highly aggressive moves, and then I wimp out. It's basically what it is. I just wimped out and played knight d3. So Brian was ecstatic. He played rook takes f1, rook takes f1, c takes d5, and now all these trades start happening. Rook b1 was another slight inaccuracy. Rook f5 was a much better move. Bishop d3, and now everything starts getting traded. And I play this pawn on e5 to kind of secure my advantage. With a passed pawn on e5, it's pretty difficult to lose the game, especially once it gets protected with pawn to d4. So that was my thought there. Rook c6, d4, and d4 is actually a mistake because Brian now has a pretty strong drawing idea with queen b4 because of back rank mate on c1, the threat on d4, and I'm kind of forced into passivity with moves like queen d3. So, but instead he played queen c7, threatening rook c1, which will be a mate. h3, rook c1, trades start happening. And now Brian made a mistake. He played queen c7 when he should try a move like g5, which keeps a lot of drawing potential alive. So g5, maybe I just play e6, queen f4, and now h4 is a really important move. And this ending should be fairly... Black might be able to hold this ending. It's a little unclear, but I think it's okay. But instead, Brian played queen c7, which is not a very good move. And now he played e6, which is very good because it threatens the exchange of queens, which is very bad for Black in this position. If he plays queen takes g3, it's a losing king and pawn ending. And if he plays a move like queen e7, then my queen just infiltrates with queen e5, and the d5 pawn is going to drop. So So with only a minute and 5 seconds on the clock, and it's a very difficult position to analyze. And with his last 10 seconds, he panicked and took on G3. And now from here, it's fairly easy cleanup for White. And White's pawn gets there in just the nick of time. And after King D4, Brian finally resigned. My king's just gonna munch these pawns, or this way if I need to. So my king's in the square if he tries to break through with B3 or B3 followed by A3. So I apologize to Brian for declining his draws, but this type of position those types of positions are pretty difficult to agree to a draw on. It's kind of like saying, this is too complicated, I don't want to look at it anymore, I draw. And then everything's kind of relegated to the post-mortem ugliness, where you go like 20 moves deep in some random variation. But I felt good that I played it out, and I actually won the game, and it's probably one of my best games from 2012. I'd like to know what you guys think in the comments below. This is actually my last game from this tournament. It was a 5-round tournament, but Sunday morning when I woke up, I couldn't get my car started, so I had to withdraw because I was like 2.5 hours away. No one was going to be able to give me a ride, so oh well. But I think this game made everything kind of worth it. I mean, between this game and my Pierre Julien game, I thought I was playing really well this tournament. Maybe I could have won the whole thing. But I'd like to know what you guys think in the comments, and let me know if the faster pace is too much. Yeah, that's all I got. I'll catch you guys next time.